Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Bank of Ireland, a proud sponsor of Irish rugby. Never stop competing.
Now then, I'm absolutely delighted to say that we've got Brian O'Driscoll beaming in from an exotic, unnamed location. Brian, for the first time ever, I can introduce you as a Leinster Hall of Famer.
Thank you, Owen. Thank you. If London is exotic, well, I'll take it. But actually, do you know what? It's quite exotic in my hotel because the Ivor Novello Awards are on outside, and you two have literally just arrived, or just arriving in 5 minutes. And Robbie Williams is here. His manager came up to me. He was an Irish guy. I didn't know. And we had a chat, and he said that he was arriving. He was getting an award today. So actually, it's quite fancy.
And I presume you are there for the Ivor Novello Awards?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, I'm not. Although I have been to it. I went to it about 5 years ago with a friend who was in university, a guy called Mike McCormick, who's a great guy. And we had some belt of a night. And yeah, Shane McGowan was there. And and he was getting whatever honour it was at the time. It's that the Ivor Novello one. What I've understood is it's the one from your peers. It's like the songwriters award. So it's, of all of them, it's very prestigious. So when it's like any award that's voted for by those in your industry that you respect and that and them honouring you, it always counts that little bit more. So I feel like, I'm sticking my head out and waving across to a few people, but I might leave that off.
Well, I presume you and Bono are on first name basis and you've got a good friendship.
We're so tight. Yeah. We're so tight. Yeah, incredibly tight.
Right. Let's chat a little bit about rugby. The Seven story has rumbled on. I must say, I'm a little bit surprised that it's still in the agenda 8 days on, Brian. Maybe part of it is to do with the fact that there isn't an Irish team in the Champions Cup final this week. Maybe everybody would have moved on. But I do think there is maybe a deeper... This story is hitting deeper than a lot of people might have expected. I think, I'm not sure, is it because of the reaction from the players and kind of how articulate they have been in their distaste towards what has happened to them. But for whatever reason, this has rumbled on into this week. I think not a lot of people would have been surprised by the decision taken at the time, but maybe opinions have changed 8 days later. What's been your journey when you've been watching the story from afar?
Well, first of all, I've got a lot of sympathy for the Sevens boys. I've been lucky enough that I've over the course of the last 10 years, almost since it was resurrected under David Nucifor's stewardship, to have a Sevens program again, to have it as a feeder into 15s, and then almost immediately, those, certainly from the men's point of view, they got onto the HSBC series, have had an awful lot of success. Okay, didn't ever manage to win one of the events, but they've been in finals. They were third in the World Cup a few years ago I think it was in Cape Town. They've been incredibly consistent, and as have the women come and followed suit as well. So I have total sympathy in their situation, how all of these players now all of a sudden look as though they're going to be out of a gig. But there's always two sides to every story. And I would imagine that the powers that be within the IRFU haven't taken this decision lightly. My sense is that there's potential trouble looming down the line from a financial point of view. And all this comes down to is securing financial stability over the course of the next 5-10 years. It's been very well documented about Wales. I think Scotland, are not far away from being in a similar predicament to Wales, or certainly on the road there. And even a union like Ireland, who everyone thought was bulletproof, when you see 18.5 million loss last year, the implications of a World Cup year when you don't host those November test matches having such a significant impact on the balance sheet, there's something not right. We're seeing clubs in the UK folding. We know that 3 of the provinces of 4 are really struggling, and even from all sorts, from a funding point of view, commercially not successful at the moment. They just haven't really recovered from post-COVID. So I think the decision is a financial one, and it's I feel for David Humphreys, where he's come into the role and now, he's barely gotten his feet under the desk, and he has to deliver this sort of news. And it's not just because I know Humps and I know what sort of guy he is. This is a bigger picture piece, but it doesn't mean that everyone shouldn't feel worthy of feeling hard done by the union, the players, the public. Because it's not a good news story. It's not a good news day for anything, because I think many of us thought that sevens was going to be the route into the global market, became an Olympic sport, an opportunity to achieve a gold and a medal of some sort is such a carrot to these players. But ultimately in Ireland, sevens is about being a feeder into 15s. 15s runs the game. 15 is the financial payer and the capital appreciator of rugby. And you can't get away from that. And I'd be interested to ask all of the players that play sevens. I bet you none of them tell you that sevens is the final mark of where they want to reach. I bet you all of these see it as a segue into the 15s game. So it's very disappointing from their perspective because of the unbelievable hard work that they've put in, the almost overachieving that you might have you might have called, based on the qualities of global teams, Fiji, New Zealand, South Africa, England, France, all these teams that have been synonymous with sevens for years. And we all of a sudden, after a 15 or 20 year sojourn, we come back in and we're competitive and we're beating these teams. So it is hugely frustrating, but it's got to be a bigger picture piece around what is coming down the line. And I think there's a lot of misinformation as well. Like there's funding concerns around World Rugby, with the men getting relegated. That doesn't mean that they're not going to get on the series next year, because I think there are represages, and so there is the capacity to still do that. But I think irrespective of that, I think this is big picture stuff, and you can't get away from that. And just trying to future proof the security of rugby in general in Ireland.
That's the thing. And I think your point there about it being a feeder for 15s, the IRFU have been consistent on that, to be fair to them. Like, that is the reason why they've kept the women's programme, is because the sevens is a significant feeder for them. So in fairness to them, there's that. And also, I think it's been a touch unfair to suggest that David Humphreys has some sort of personal dislike or grudge for the sevens programme. Just because David Nucifora had a personal love for it doesn't mean that his successor has a personal hatred for it. And it does, you have to say, kind of paint itself in isolation as a financial decision. At the same time, it's possible to say that while also believing that the sevens players, you can feel totally sorry for them and feel that it is a touch unfair and maybe question why this has happened. What will be interesting though, Brian, is what will be the next decision. And it's been said on the show this week that there's a hiring freeze at the IRFU. And if there are a number of other steps, I've compared it to Manchester United and what Jim Radcliffe has had to do there over the past couple of years in terms of unpopular decisions, then we might actually be turning over the stone and seeing a very ugly picture for the financial situation of rugby in this country and in a couple of other countries.
And that is a big worry about what is coming down the line that I mentioned. And I think you're absolutely right around David Humphreys versus David Nucifora. It was undoubtedly David Nucifora's baby. He had his eyes set on Ireland and the Olympics, and we achieved it. We've had teams participate in the last 2 Olympics at least, which has been amazing, and unfortunate not to go a little bit further. Was a quarterfinal for the men's this time round. Okay, maybe not as good in 2020 or played into it was Tokyo 20. Yeah. So I do think that it's very disappointing from their perspective, but there's no doubt that David Humphreys doesn't hate sevens. And what's suggested around, and certainly some of the comments from David Nucifora are probably unhelpful, that I've seen this week around, his disgust for it and World Rugby doesn't deserve sevens competition, and someone, the sooner someone takes it off their hands and makes it their own, the better. Do you know what? I almost think that World Rugby would encourage that. I really do, because sevens, it works in some ways, but it doesn't in other. It's a loss maker. And I don't know if it's going to return a profit anytime soon. And any business, any functioning business is not going to continue going down that road. You see it in the club game over in the UK and in France, but with these wealthy benefactors willing to lose money year on year because it's, okay, for want of another term, their plaything or the enjoyment factor that they derive from it, and they're willing to lose a certain amount. But that can't go on forever. And World Rugby are no different than anybody else. They're realists, around needing to turn that corner. And you look at the women's game, the development of it, and it's going to turn a profit in maybe on the next cycle. I don't know if it's going to be this cycle, but it's going to get there. And I think lots of time and investment and resources have gone into sevens. And they just haven't quite caught what they need, be it between the broadcasting. If you go to a sevens event, you'll have the best time ever. They're phenomenal events. They're so much fun. There's fancy dress. But actually, from a broadcast point of view, showing something over the course of 3 or 4 hours and different games coming in, and then you have to, sometimes you have to wait for the cup semi-finals and final, but you have to watch all of the plate and the bowl and lesser teams, and no one has that time anymore. So I think World Rugby don't know what the sevens iteration is going to look like, and maybe that's part of the decision-making process for the IRFU, that as they're working that out, they've got to go and make their own decisions around future-proofing their future, and making the call and making it early enough before it actually becomes a major issue down the line, which is what I would imagine is transpiring.
It begs the question then, Brian, what are we looking at with regards to rugby's future that is profitable and sustainable, particularly from an Irish standpoint? We know that the internationals are the big money spinners. Even the news this week that there's one rest week less in the Six Nations from next year to introduce the Autumn Nations Cup that's coming in. That means one extra test match per year. There is a trend at the moment where you kind of look at test rugby being the moneymaker and everything else just about washing its face at best in Ireland.
And that's the issue. I don't know if we discussed on the show yet around this rogue franchise league that is being touted. And, about, I don't know, is it 8 teams? And there was a bit of noise about it about a year or 18 months ago, and like many things, like the 12s that was suggested might work, 5-6 years ago, it vanished and never came back. But this has actually continued to bubble, and there's talk of 30 of the top 50 players in the world being interested in taking part in it. And I suppose it would ultimately become a critical mass piece around enough players sign on, it becomes a thing. And apparently there's very deep pockets. And I've just heard that it's not gone away. So maybe that, and I don't know whether any of the unions would be interested in that, whether they're totally against it, whether World Rugby is for it or not. But it does feel as though rugby on a global stage needs change, because what's been happening previously is we're just staying afloat, just keeping your head above water, and just managing, and ultimately you will run out of road in that regard. We dodged a catastrophe in COVID not impacting the World Cup in 2019. It arrived in 3 or 4 months afterwards. I would hate to think where the game would be if the World Cup wasn't was caught in those 2 or 3 years of COVID, of lockdown, of no attendances, of minimal participation, etc., etc. That would have been that could have really ended the game as we know it. So the fact that we've avoided that, but yet there's still been repercussions, we're still living it out, we're still trying to keep afloat. There isn't change needed in there, and thankfully I'm not part of the Brains Trust to work out what that is, but maybe this franchise league in some iteration is an answer to the financial concerns that are impacting every nation. See it in Australia, what's going on, New Zealand, it's rugby is God there, and they're even in a tricky spot. I don't know what's happened with the money with Silver Lake, whether that's already been absorbed or what, but there's no there's no union, or certainly the perception is that there's no union that is absolutely bolstered, financially. Maybe in France, the top 14 seems to be going well, but by all accounts, the broadcasting deal there is going to be significantly reduced, as it is being across the globe. There was big money paid by pay TV in France a few years ago because I think they lost the football, and so they came in heavy on rugby. That's not going to be the case next time it goes out to tender. So all of these financial packages or the broadcast packages are being reduced, and so the knock-on effect is less money into the unions, less money into the clubs, certainly in Ireland. And it all has, it's like all the negative 1% and 2%ers, but actually these are kind of 5% and 10%ers that have a bearing on the overall financial situation, within the game.
Yeah, it's worrying times for sure. Brian, the last time we were chatting to you was a couple of days after Leinster's defeat to Northampton, so it was before the Lions announcement. I don't think when we were talking at that point we had a clear idea of just how bad Caelan Doris' injury was going to be, and that was one of the big talking points from the Lions squad announcement, the fact that he had his kind of dreams ripped away from him twofold that week, really, given what happened against Northampton, and then obviously with the Lions squad. I think there's every chance he might have been named as Lions captain. Was that for you as a former Lions captain yourself, maybe the thing that struck home closest to you, or what else did you take away from that afternoon when the squad was announced?
No, there's nothing good in it. There's no, I spoke to Caelan a few days after the injury, and I think he knew the writing was on the wall around the significance of the injury. This was at the Leinster Awards, and like any champion, he tried to put a positive spin on it, but you could see the disappointment, and everyone's feeling it for him. He's at the height of his powers. He's 27 years of age. He's just been captain of Ireland. We'll never know whether he was going to be Lions captain or not, but he was certainly very much in the reckoning, because I think he's maybe one of three players that feel as though they're a shoe-in for, along with the Toji and Sheahan, for starter places in the Test match. And for that all to be gone, having previously missed the last tour to South Africa as well, having to wait another 4 years, you never know what's going to come in that time. Like, it's bitterly disappointing for him, and I'm sure he'll take a while to recover from it. It's a hard couple of months ahead of him, because obviously he'll be wishing all the Irish guys well, but really sad that he's not a part of it. And I'm sure he'll probably try and disconnect himself from rugby for a period of time. And ignorance is bliss in that regard, if you don't know. But it's very hard to escape anything now with our phones, with connection with people, the conversations that people are having around the time of the Lions. It will be impossible for him to stay away from it. So I really am so disappointed for him, and in kind of missing out on this huge opportunity for him.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, do you have to almost torture yourself Clockwork Orange style and just watch every minute of the Lions, or watch the Champions Cup final this weekend, or is the best thing just to switch off?
No is the answer to that. No, I if I was a Leinster player, I wouldn't be watching the Champions Cup final this weekend. No way. I suppose looking back to, I certainly wasn't watching the days that Munster were in the final. No way. No, it was disconnect and find out the result at the end. When they were going well and we were struggling, and okay, it's not one of your big adversaries. Okay, it's Northampton, they beat you. You don't want to go on and I don't think you're cheering them on, or you're cheering Bordeaux on. You're just sad for yourself that you have to wait another year to try and do it all again. So I would. It's a personal thing. I certainly wouldn't be going looking at a final that I could be playing in. I'd be out in the golf course.
Sounds like a lot more fun. Is there any?
Well, not with my short game, but anyway, yeah. Even bad golf was fun.
So that Munster example is an interesting one. So you guys would have wanted to have taken them down the following year. There has to come a point when you analyse how they play in the biggest games, right? Do you, in the cold light of day, watch back a Heineken Cup final that you wouldn't have been in, or like do you actually not? Do you just completely write off the rest of the season, and then next year you look at some Munster tape? In your case,
Yeah, next year. Next year, you don't go. Yeah, I don't think you look at the big games. I think you have to, rather than looking at the opposition, you got to look at yourselves. Why aren't you performing? And that's ultimately what Leinster have to do. It's not that they came up against. They did obviously come up against a better team because Northampton played and scored some brilliant tries against them, just beat them on the day. But Leinster didn't capitalize on their opportunities, and you've got to understand and look inwardly and introspectively to, find out why is that not happening. Why is in the biggest games are we not able to deliver? And that's it's been painful viewing for the last number of years, but they've got another pre-season of doing that, of identifying how they can change things, and it's so marginal. It really is. We're splitting hairs on 1 and 2 point games here and there, and a decision at the very end as to whether it should be given or TMO. So there's nothing there, but that's the reality of win and loss. It always feels so much more extreme than the reality of where it is. So you have to go back and learn from those losses and use them to fuel your fire for the next time before you run out of time and before the next group of players starts coming through.
We do lose interest in the Champions Cup final if there isn't an Irish province involved. However, on paper, it looks like Northampton Saints versus Bordeaux Begley could be an all-time great final. Although we expected that from Bordeaux to lose, and maybe it was Leinster's Northampton that actually stepped up to be the semi-final of that weekend. So we can't always predict these things, but certainly this should be a game full of brilliant attacking, right?
Should be. Two exciting teams, lots of firepower. You look at so many of the French backline in that Bordeaux team, many of the English backline in the Northampton team. The big thing for Northampton, I think that's where they got on top of Leinster, is just physically really impose themselves. And they were emotionally able to do it in the semi-final, where no one gave them a shot. Everyone's giving them a shot in this final. So they've got to pitch it slightly differently, not have a chip on their shoulder, but still go out and deliver physically, because I think that would be the concern against these big marauding French packs, as whether they crush you or not, whether they suffocate you, whether they smother you, and don't allow you the platform that you want to play with your exciting backs, with that really great multi-phase play that Northampton have. One of the best in Europe, and there's no doubt that there'll be lots of tries, you would imagine. It's just a matter of, from Saints' point of view, can they get enough front foot ball to allow themselves to pull apart the Bordeaux defence? Because I think they will do that. I think there's good defenders in there, but I think there's definitely real smarts in the Saints backline that can create opportunity for their firepower. For Freeman, who's scoring tries for fun, Ram played brilliantly. And I don't know, is Furbank going to be back for the weekend? I don't think he is, but they've gone very well with the crew that they've had in the last few weeks. They won late against Saracens at the weekend, and that winning habit piece becomes very important again. Just kept maintaining that momentum into the final this weekend. So yeah, I don't know, does Pinot, is he fit or is he gone for the season? I haven't seen any update on that, but it should be a great game. And can Matthew Jalibert stand up and deliver on a big European day, where he's been questioned about being a little bit flaky in the past, that he has these man of the match performances, but then he vanishes or disappears and kind of runs away from his duties defensively. He'll be massively targeted on a defensive from a defensive point of view, but what he can do in attack and his running game is super exciting if it does open up. So it should be a great game for the neutral. And I'm going to be at a communion, but I'm going to do my level best to keep one eye on a telly as well, to see what should be some great rugby.
I thought you said that I thought you were going to say that you ensured that the communion was on at the same time as this Champions Cup final once Leinster were dumped out of the semi-final. That was your way of dealing with it.
Yeah, we weren't actually going to. We're going to have a communion for any of our children, but we've decided to cram one in. It's not actually my child. It's my nephew, and And actually, I missed my son's communion a few years ago because I was doing the Champions Cup final on a Saturday as well. So I got to the really important part, the mass, and then had to head off to Lansdowne Road or to the Aviva.
I should say, by the way, that Penno and Furbank could both play this weekend. We'll see how the final team sheets look up. The quote is he'll be fine for the final on Penno, and Furbank could return for Northampton, so maybe a bit more of a certainty that Penno will play, but hopefully from a neutral perspective they're both on the pitch. Brian O'Driscoll and Off the Ball with Bank of Ireland, the proud sponsor of Irish Rugby, never stop competing. Just a couple of other things just to wrap up on. Just kind of broadly speaking about the end of the URC season. We'll get into a bit more depth once we get to the quarterfinal, semi-final stage, Brian, but just really looking at Leinster last weekend, and look, I know journalists are asking questions to try and again get to the bottom of the Northampton Saints defeat, but it still looms large over Leinster at the moment, and maybe it's a little bit evident in their performances in the URC since then. You just kind of come to the conclusion that Leinster can go on and win these next 3 games, win their silverware, and nobody will give them any credit for that this season. However, if they lose one of those games, then it'll just intensify all the negativity around Leinster this season.
Yeah, Leinster are like a version of Spurs, aren't they? You know, like, is Ange going to hold on to his gig just because he's got just because he won a trophy? I do think it's important for Leinster to win the URC this year because they've failed at it. You know, on both fronts, European and domestically as well, with the URC over the course of the last 5 seasons. Is it? They haven't managed to. You know, I think, what, do they have 4 in a row from 17 through to 20 or something to that effect? And then all of a sudden, nothing. So on top of all these European disappointments, it is really important that they do win some silverware. So I think there is additional pressure on them to do that. And maybe the performances and just finding a way to win over the course of certainly last weekend, is a good thing. You know, the last thing they need to do is go back to winning 60-0, and then by the time they get to a semi-final or a final and find really physical and worthy opponents to come up against them and put it to them, and then they don't have that muscle memory once again. It's like Groundhog Day on these semi-final finals. So maybe coming in under the radar a little bit, feeling a tiny bit sorry for themselves still isn't a bad thing to sharpen the focus, because they do need to win it this year. I think they will cop a fair bit of flack if they don't manage to win silverware, and I think they probably know it as well. And I think they're probably putting additional focus. Not that they need to be any more professional, but I think there'll be a lot of conversations going on saying we need to deliver this, we need to get it done.
And Jacques Nienaber always wins something in his second season.
Hey, there you go. There you go.
One other thing really interesting that we look at the Barbarians in June. You know, the 2 best friends that anybody can ever have, Sam Cane and Peter O'Mahony, are going to be lining up together. It just feels that rugby and the universe is giving us all these brilliant burying the hatchet stories recently. Rico Ioane signing for Leinster, Sam Cane and Peter O'Mahony playing together. Is it just proof that everything just exists on the pitch and everything outside of it doesn't really matter? Or do they genuinely have to psychologically say, okay, this doesn't matter for 80 minutes, and then we'll go back to hate each other?
I don't know if you know, but myself and Tana Umaga are actually the coaches for the Barbarians. Listen, you know what? Things are said, and, you know, I think often more is made of it in the press than actually meets the eye amongst players, and it'll be an opportunity for Pete and Sam Cane to bury the hatchet and to spend a bit of time together. And the issue is sometimes it's so transient that there's no opportunity for players to get to know one another. And certainly from when you play Southern Hemisphere opposition, you know, the chance to hang out for a week and room with people you wouldn't ordinarily room with is enlightening around, you know, the people behind the players. And so that's really, really important. A little bit akin to the Lions tour, around you have kind of preconceived notions about people, but actually you don't really know them. You just see them in interviews and you see them on the field and you see their behaviours. And sometimes that's not always favourable on the pitch, but that often doesn't reflect the person off the pitch. So I think it'll be a good thing. It'll be they'll have a fun week. It's down in Cape Town, they just need to make sure that they finish up their drinking on the Wednesday night and not the Thursday night.
The thing, though, Brian, and I know you're obviously saying it in jest, but yourself and Tana did bury the hatchet. To be fair,
No, it's all good. It's all good. It took a while. It did take a while for us to kind of properly get closure, and it dragged on, unnecessarily for a long time. But yeah, we're the odd text.
Yeah, but is it like, I'm not sure. I don't want to put rugby on a pedestal. Maybe it's just like a sports thing that by and large sports people can bury the hatchet, as I say. They can kind of realise the difference between sport and real life. Or maybe it's just time, Brian. I'm not sure what the common denominator is here, but it's certainly a thread through a lot of these Irish rugby grudges that seem to exist.
Yeah, I think life's short. There's no point in dragging it on unnecessarily. If you can find a way to have closure of any incident, I think it's important. It'll certainly help Rico Ione having closure of his moment with Johnny Sexton when he comes and plays for Johnny Sexton's club. Pete and Sam will, I'm sure, we'll have that conversation, or go, how are you? Or it'll be awkward for a while, but they'll get to know each other. And with me and Tana, it just, we didn't find, when you live on opposite sides of the hemisphere, and he said, she said, and it kind of festers away for a long period of time without actually having the opportunity to put it to bed. That time should have come way before it did. It went on for the best part of a decade without really kind of having a chat around it and then parking it properly. So, I think, I don't know, what's the point in grudges? What's the point in carrying them on? Provided someone hasn't, wronged you in a way that you feel is unrecoverable, I think you have to be able to have the capacity to move on. And if I was Pete, I'd probably go, listen, sorry, we say some things in the heat of battle, hold your hands up, mea culpa, and Sam will go, no, I'm staying with this. I don't like you forevermore. He's gonna go, oh yeah, I know that too, So
yeah.
Raj used to say things to people the whole time and mortally offend them, and would be oblivious to it. But that's just it was in his personality, fiery. I don't think he even registered that he would say certain things, but yet it wasn't in his personality off the field in any shape or form. It's just competitors react and respond differently. That's the reality.
Yeah, sure, Raj and Sexton, the most obvious example of all. Brian, good stuff. Thanks a million. Enjoy the company of Robbie Williams and Bono. You can peek the head out the door there and get a free glass of champagne and get invited into the party, I'm sure.
Yeah, I hope all the guests have been entertained.
Yeah. On that amazing note, Brian, chat next time.
Cheers, talk to you, bye.
Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Bank of Ireland, a proud sponsor of Irish rugby. Never stop competing.